What's up, you guys? First of all, welcome back to the channel. And also, I'm very excited about this video. I had the opportunity to sit down with Christian Vande Velde and do what is a long-form interview. You probably already know that because you've clicked on a video that is like close to an hour long. But this is uncut, unedited, and this is just a conversation we had. If you don't know who Christian Vande Velde is, shame on you. He is a huge name in American cycling. We get into his entire career, his training, all the teams he's been on, all the Grand Tours he raced in, and what it was like racing with Lance, going through this crazy era in American cycling. So I won't spoil anything. I just wanted to kind of preface this video and sit down, enjoy, maybe put it on your training ride. And with that, I want to introduce Christian Vande Velde. 6.5 watts per kilo is no joke. But you were doing that like in your in the heyday, no?
Probably like more like, yeah, I really don't know. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, I don't think so. It's like probably 6'2". I mean, I know I did like 6 for an hour for the time trials. And that's the only time I ever really had a recording device because it was too heavy for us to put on the bikes. So because we had power tap at the time, and there's like no way we're putting that thing out.
Oh, really? That's interesting. So like you had the ability to run power, but you just wouldn't because of the weight of it?
You got it. So it was another 300 or 400 grams of it. So it was almost a pound on your bike to have that hub.
And now they're looking for ways to add weight to the bike to make sure it's legal, right?
Yeah, and then later on in my career, when I didn't have the same form, of course, I had the power, but I didn't really pay attention to it that much because it doesn't really, when you're racing, it doesn't matter. It's like either you can or you can't. So you're not really looking at it too much. And some people are so crazy that they can't even look at it because they're like, oh my God, I'm going to die. And they even put tape over it, and just so they don't have a mental milkshake.
I tell people that I have a lot of fans of the channel who ask me about like power during racing. What are you looking at? I'm like, dude, I'm not looking at anything during the race. And by the way, if you're distracted by your computer, turn it on, collect the metrics, do whatever, but put it in your pocket or like go track mode and like put it on your seat master or whatever. Like don't look at it because during a race, you're right, it doesn't matter.
No, and I think a lot of people, Jeff, as well. They don't understand. They don't know because they have this number or whatever it might be, whether it be heart rate or power, mostly power, that they think is their ceiling, and they're much stronger than they actually are, or much stronger than they actually think. And so, just having that away from you and just going for it, sometimes you'll break those boundaries often.
Totally. My best PRs always come on race day, which is counterintuitive. People think, you go out, you warm up, you do your hardest effort. That's your PR. No. My best is like when I have that carrot on a stick, the guy in front of me who I have to chase down,
Same, dude. Same. I was not a trainer. I was definitely a racer.
So, you and me both. So that's probably where the similarities end, though. So I wanted to talk more about equipment, because that's one of the things I'm really curious about is like you came through the era of like this huge shift in equipment. Like, can you tell me more about that? Because now we're spoiled. Like I train on carbon wheels, like, did you even race on carbon wheels when you first started? Did you race on a carbon bike?
Well, yeah, check this out. I mean, this is perfect timing. I mean, so if you want to, this is my
cool.
Dad's 1972 track bike from the Munich Olympics. And I raced on that for my first national championships, which I won. And so we retired that thing right away in 94, but that was my first one. And then, yeah, this is 99 tour bike. So we had the first OCLV, remember, with Trek. And so that was 96, 97, they came out with that. So we were actually kind of ahead of the game. And then, yeah, of course, early 90s was just, old Eddie Merckx from Motor Old Team. Those things were, I could use that as a boat anchor. That thing is so heavy.
Down tube shifters and everything, right?
Yeah. That's Sean Yates's bike from 91, I want to say, which I raced on as a junior with 185 cranks, by the way. I don't know what my dad was thinking. Like, not looking at the...
How do you even corner on that thing? You just flip a pedal, right?
I know, and criteriums as a junior, probably not the most sane thing to be doing. But no, so we had Rolf wheels. Do you remember Rolf wheels at all?
Are they not still around? I remember them, yes.
So those were the first carbon wheels that we had. And and Spinergy. Don't forget about Spinergy, dude. Come on.
Yeah.
That was 98. We had Spinergy, which were cool. But I don't think they were aerodynamic at all. Actually, almost counterintuitive to even spokes. And then the Rolf wheels were the first ones where like, wow, this is crazy difference because they're quite light, but they're really fragile. So we broke them all the time, and we didn't really understand yet brake pads. So we didn't know about some of the carbon brake pads yet, with cork and different things. So if it rained, for example, I remember Amstel Gold one time where all of our teams, we were putting our feet down, going into the corners, trying to stop because we had no brakes left. So yeah, the whole evolution, you think back of Jan Ulrich riding those first carbon wheels, and everyone said he's a horrible descender. No, wasn't a horrible descender, but he had like rubber brake pads that were melting on the descents, and then they would lock up every time. I mean, it was terrifying when you had that. So yeah, and then of course all the way to later on with aerodynamics, wind tunnel testing. Actually, if I back up all the way, it's really funny because my first really cool bike, I came from the track background and I was a team pursuiter, and we had the best bikes of all time. If you think about it, that Project 96 GTs, which were all banned because they didn't have a top tube, they didn't have seat stays. Those were, over $100,000 bikes, which were incredible.
What year was that?
1996 for the Atlanta Olympics. And
so they just didn't have the same UCI rules then?
No, it was fair game. Anything you could think of, you could just come up with crazy ideas. And then the UCI finally was like, yo, timeout. These don't even look like bikes anymore.
Yeah.
And of course, you're taking out nations. Colombia was always a great example that they didn't have the funds to do that. And you're automatically out of the race because you don't have, a revolutionary bike. So I agree with that. I think that's great to have a level playing field. But yeah, performance, just on the technical side alone, I feel like we wrecked cycling a little bit in some place with the skin suits. We were the first people to wear skin suits on the Champs-Élysées and stuff like that for our whole team to lead out Tyler Farrar. I mean, those are the kind of things that it was just evolution was going to happen. If either I did it or you did it, or someone's going to do it.
What was the big tradition bucking, made the biggest impact? You mentioned skin suits, and then you mentioned carbon wheels. Was there anything else? What about components on the bike, like shifting, electronic shifting? Because you went through that whole generation too. Is that as consequential?
No, it really wasn't. I mean, that's still, everything works pretty well, and sometimes it even has its downsides as well, right? When it goes into crash mode, which we've seen quite often, and then I think they've almost put too many speeds on now, where you've seen a lot of drop change as of late. So they're gonna, yeah. I'm sure they'll get through that within the next year or so. But I would say the biggest one, originally with Le Mans riding the carbon bike was huge, going away from steel. The wheels was massive, and now if you're going to really look at time trial performance, it's all the skin suit. Everyone's always looking at the bike, but those skin suits are insane now. With the way the fabric goes, I mean, they're $3,500 skin suits that it used once and thrown away. So a lot of times in the UK, they chop those things up so no one can mimic them. I mean, it's pretty nuts. And of course the helmet as well. So it's helmet, skin suit, wheels, bike.
How much of it do you think that we should stick with tradition? Because I know there's no rule preventing us from just taking that those aerodynamic benefits in terms of skin suits or helmets on the road bike. We could almost look like we're doing a time trial, right? But there's a tradition aspect to it where people don't do that still. But I feel like they keep pushing that limit, right?
They do. I mean, if you watch the Tour de France this year with the Specialized, had that helmet with a little inner sock on them.
Oh yeah, that looks so goofy to me.
Did you see that?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, those kind of things, I feel like we take one step forward and 45 step back, as far as a step, no, we should not be doing this just for your aunt watching this, wow, that guy looks like an idiot out there. So whether it's fast or not, we do have to, just like you said earlier with the timeout of making bikes, there's a I don't know, a line that we can't cross, because it does become an arms race, with teams with $50-60 million budgets. How do you compete with that? And now with the nutrition side, is gone completely bonkers of what we put in your body. And looking back, honestly, it's nothing what I did or chose to do with my bike. It was mostly what I didn't put in my body as far as nutrition, not eating enough, always trying to stay so skinny. Those kind of things were just, overtrained all the time, but mostly dietary, massive.
So that's a good segue. I kind of took the words out of my mouth. That was my next question, is you also went through probably a lot of changes in the sport when it comes to nutrition. And we're going to talk about training too. That's the other thing I wanted to talk about. But in terms of nutrition, was there what were the big changes from when you first started? Were people as mindful? Was it just like be skinny as possible? And then like, how did that evolve? Because I feel like the riders are getting skinnier now. Am I crazy?
Yeah, some. I mean, then you got Wout, so he messes everything up. I mean,
Yeah.
every conversation he messes up. But yeah, everyone is skinnier, and they could time being lean and strong at the same time. Where we were just kind of like just hoping for the best a lot of times, and with the way you lost weight and when you lost weight. For example, guys go to a training camp up in the mountains, and then they're restricting the calories of carbohydrates. It'd be like the
And you were doing
worst.
this too, I take it.
Oh yeah, stupid. I mean,
Yeah.
some of the worst things I ever did to myself. Put your body into a hole for 2 or 3 weeks it takes to dig out of. And you're supposed to do this as a positive. So now you are sacrificing time up in the mountain by yourself. Your family sacrificing by themselves at home, and you suck now after doing so. So it was just dumb. And it was really just not knowing any better at that point in time. So what they know now and what they could do. First of all, I think the biggest one is on the bike nutrition. Eating so much, up to 500 calories per hour during races, and even training as well when you're doing really hard. Where we would kind of be a badge of honor to come home completely destroyed, just bonking and dead. It's so dumb. And then you came home and then you overate on the backside. Whereas now you're still almost, your glycogen is semi full when you get home. I mean, you're hungry still, and you have a reasonable lunch or dinner after that, and you're not gorging yourself and actually putting on weight after training. So I would say nutrition is massive.
Yeah, that's a good point because like it defeats the purpose of both. If you're not fueling yourself during the ride, you're not getting a good performance benefit. And then if you're just like gorging yourself at dinner that night to make up for it, then you're not getting the weight loss benefit. So it's like you're not doing either thing. So that's super bizarre. And you weren't working, like you didn't have a nutritionist when you were first in this a professional in the sport telling you like, hey, don't do that.
Dude, I mean, US Postal, everyone thinks the US Postal being this juggernaut, right? They forget that in 1998, we had like 14 people, 15 with Kenny. And Kenny he was a working postman. That was Kenny LeBay. He grew up together in Chicago, but and Robbie Ventura a little bit later on stayed in Chicago. So we didn't really have that many people on the team. So it was like, if you were breathing, you went to races. I think I raced 112 days my first year pro.
Oh God.
I mean, just hoping. It was just like throwing eggs at a wall. Like, good luck, and just hold on.
Did you know at that point, like where you fit in with the team? And part of that might be like, did you know what type of athlete you were? Like, did you think that, well, maybe I'm a time trialist, maybe I'm a climber? Not, you didn't know at that point?
No, not at all, man. I came from the track, the year before. So I won the World Cup overall in the pursuit and team pursuit. But I'm not a big person. I was probably like 150 some pounds. So they automatically thought I'd be like a classics rider. And since I was Belgian as well, that made me into the Belgian camp. I mean, I'm not, first of all, I was like, guys, I have a strong last name, but I am from Chicago. My dad was from Chicago. My grandpa was like, we're American. So I have never ridden on cobblestones before. How am I going to be a classics rider? So it was kind of like, after my first Vuelta a España, so that was that first year as well. I did a Grand Tour my first year. Then I started realizing that was probably where my strengths were, just being able to recover and enjoying it as well. So just the Grand Tours.
That's crazy too, that your first year you went and did a Grand Tour. I don't feel like neopros would be racing a Grand Tour their first year, like nowadays. That's something you build towards, right?
Yeah, like I told you, we didn't have assets. So if you were breathing, you went. And by the way, we finished that race. Back then we started with 9 riders. We finished that race with 4. So it was like, no team bus. Like let's take a step back.
Yeah,
we had Passat VR6s, 2 of them, and so you'd get drop trowel on the side of the road, just like you would go into any like amateur race, that you and I would go to right now, right? And you're changing the car. There's fans trying to ask for your gloves or sunglasses, and you're trying to change this, make it home to the hotel. So it was a completely different sport just 20 some years ago.
Almost sounds like amateur racing, like what we're doing here locally.
Totally. I mean, at least getting to and from it was until the racing started.
Did it change? Did the organization on Postal change? It must have once you started finding success. Obviously, like with Lance, like Grand Tour success, things must have changed pretty quickly once the sport started to get traction.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely still took a while because the budget wasn't there. The first year in '99 that I went to the tour, we had two little camper vans, and these are European camper vans. They're not U.S. camper vans. They're like on a Ford 150 chassis,
Yeah,
and
it's like a Sprinter van almost.
yeah, we call it like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. That thing was horrible, and so we had two of those, and of course the A team up in the front, we call them, was like Lance, Tyler, and Kevin Livingston. Was only three of them, and there was five in the other one. So I didn't even have a seat, so I just laid on the ground. It's I was the youngest one in there, and listening to my Sony Walkman. So that just takes you the time where it was,
As a young aspiring professional cyclist, was this everything you dreamed of at the moment as you're laying on the camper van trying to fall asleep?
Oh, it was great. I mean, like I had the best young rider or actually we didn't even have. Okay, this really dates me. Like there wasn't even a jersey there wasn't a white jersey for the best young rider, so I just got flowers every morning, which was kind of lame. And especially I would have loved to have that, especially now on my wall. But yeah, everything was going great, and I mean, I loved it. It was my passion, my whole life that I was looking forward to. So yeah, I was psyched. But it's funny, the things you think that were going to happen as a kid. Like there was this conception that you had staff members to pin your numbers on, and these silly little things that would. And of course, there's no staff number pin your number on. There's none of this kind of thing. But then I never expected them to take my suitcase, be waiting for me in the hotel room and things like that. But yeah, it's funny to think of what you thought of was going to happen as a kid into what reality was.
What was it like racing with Lance back then and US Postal? I mean, that's like an era of US cycling that everyone knows about. Like, what was it like riding with those guys and having like some of the biggest success in the sport?
Well, the first year was amazing. You could tell by the way I talk about it. I was one of the was a massive year, and it was so much fun. We had 6 Americans out of the 9 on there, so we really felt like a family team. And then after that, the pressure just got massive, and then I wasn't really a part of those ever again. In 2001, I crashed out, and that was it for me. So I wasn't really too much a part. Only '99 was the only time I did a full tour with those guys. I didn't really get to experience that. What I got to experience more was like the CSC, and then of course Garmin. So it was completely different in mentality. But yeah, I mean, Lance was. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna follow. Why do you feel like the pressure mounted so much? Was it just surrounding Lance and like the expectation of
big time? Big time. I mean, he just ran it like as a Fortune 500 company, CEO. He did it, just to win. So and that's just how it was at the time, and it was. He obviously did an amazing job doing it. So 7 tours in a row, which is insane, even to think of finishing 7 tours in a row. If you think about that, it's not easy to do, let alone win 7 in a row. I mean, we saw just Tadej Pogačar crumble this year, or just make some tactical mistakes that went above his head, and I didn't think he was ever going to lose again after what I saw the last 2 years. So yeah, no, but fast forward into what it was then versus now. It's a completely different sport, and I love where the sport is right now, just because it's not Team Sky or even Postal towards the end, where it was just really just steamrolling the race day after day after day. There's it's so much more dynamic. The racing breakaways don't come back anymore because the riders are so strong, from the best guy to the worst guy in the peloton. And the tactics, they're taking more risks, so it just makes for amazing viewership. And I think we watched the best Tour de France ever. So I'm psyched. I'm a fan. I'm a massive fan of the sport, obviously. And yeah, I got the best job to sit and watch the Tour de France and get to talk about it.
Yeah, no, I'm a huge cycling dork. I'm a fan. I like doing commentary. I do amateur bike racing, but I'm totally jealous of your position. Let's talk about amateur bike racing. I want to know about that too. Like, how did you come up? Did you do the crit scene in the US crit scene? Was that even a thing when you first came into the sport?
It was, and I think that's how all the kids cut their teeth. So I grew up in the burbs of Chicago. My dad was like I was mentioning earlier, was an Olympian in '68 and '72, and he was one of the first professionals. And he actually helped out put the Motorola cycling team together with Jim Ockwitz, since Motorola was in Chicago.
I just came back from Chicago, by the way. I did.
Chose a good time to go. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I stayed in LaGrange.
Oh, okay, right down the street from me.
Oh, it is
So
okay.
yeah, so we were not far at all. But so I did that. Then I went to the track because we don't have any mountains or anything like that, and the track was the best way to really learn your trade well. And we had a velodrome by us, and then it's easiest way to be seen. So if you do well, do nationals, things like that. It was the best stepping stones for me to get into the national team program. So that's the path that I chose to take. So I didn't
Yeah.
really do too much the crit scene. There was an amazing crit scene. We all did it. It was fantastic. And I would say the coolest thing that we had versus what today is that we had the capabilities of doing so many bike races and learning your way through the trade just by racing.
Yeah.
Whether you started as a Cat 5 and became a pro eventually, or just where you're a Cat 3 like your buddy is, who's been his whole life as a Cat 3. You could do a $10,000 crit every weekend as long as you had a minivan and some buddies to go cruise around on.
Yeah, I tell a lot of people who ask me, about how to get faster, how to get stronger. It's like the short answer is like I need more information, right? Like I'm not your coach, but honestly, almost everybody can benefit from racing more. If you want to get better at racing, you have to practice the craft. And in the United States, crit racing is like the thing that is most common, nowadays at least. And yeah, I was wondering, like, if you were shaped at all by crit racing? It sounds like to be seen, it was more on the velodrome and to get on the national team, which was your aspiration.
Yeah, that was easiest for me because I don't have a sprint, so I could be up there and I'd be top 5 every time. That's not going to get you seen anywhere. And so the velodrome was easily the best way. So I got luckily into the team pursuit program. I won the points race as a junior in the senior ranks, and then started doing team pursuit, and that gave me the door to. So with training for the team pursuit, we'd go and do European stage races, and I started realizing that I was probably better at doing some of these stage races than I was actually on the track at times as well. And that got some attention to some of the European teams, and then ultimately to US Postal. But yeah, as far as the United States went, I didn't get to subject myself to too many races here in the United States. It was the Moline weekend was a big one for us. Super Week, which pretty much you just did more or less, was massive for us, which was, Super Week was not a week. It was like 12 or 14 or even 15 days of racing in a row, which we could drive to. So that was great. But I will say, as I was watching some of your videos this morning and doing some of the Grand Fondos and gravel races over the last couple of years, I would say the average person is so much stronger these days because there's so much information out there, from your channel, for example, to nutrition, we were talking about, to aerodynamics and what they actually have in their bikes. So people, they could be crazy strong, but it's just their race acumen isn't usually there, just because they don't have the possibilities to race that often. So that's a shame in my book. And I hope that it does come back a little bit more. It's just not easy to shut off those roads and pay for the cops and things like that.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree with you more on that sentiment. I just came back banging elbows and bars with everybody in the Midwest. Speaking of good crit racers, like Chicago, there's a lot of good crit racers, or at least everyone congregates in Chicago for good crit racing, because one of the things that frustrated me is like, wow, the level of racing I feel like this year was so much higher. There's so many fit people. But usually, you have like your fitness is at a 9, but also your bike handling and your skill set, right? They come up together as you're training and riding and racing and all that stuff. But I feel like over the last few years, everyone's been indoors on Zwift on a trainer, and like they're fit as hell, and they're 9.5. But it's like they kind of forgot how to handle their bike and ride, shoulder to shoulder with other people. And there was like a million, like every single day, there were 6 crashes, big ones that would wipe out like half the field and stuff. And it was like, wow, I don't remember this being this terrifying. So I agree. Like, there is all this benefit to people having access to equipment. Shit, I didn't have a power meter until 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago, because it was just cost prohibitive for me. And I wasn't able to train, and my training improved so much more when I got a power meter. But now everyone has all the equipment, they have all the training, all of the ability at their fingertips. But when they go out, the skill set to actually like that takes time, and you forget, like, you can't just hop into a P12 field and take a corner at 35 miles an hour if you haven't done that 1,000 times before. It's gonna be terrifying for you.
or you could do it by yourself and maybe not with 120 other people. It's kind of like having a bunch of Ferraris with no drivers out there. It's a scary place. And,
Yeah,
and Jeff, you might be getting a little bit old too, man. These
I
kind of
am.
things that with every year you think like, I don't know if I need to take these risks anymore.
I broke my collarbone earlier this year. We can talk about. I know you had you had a career plagued with injury 7 times. Oh my god. So it just taken me a while to bounce back, and I think if it were 21-year-old Jeff, I'd be like a month later, like get me back in the peloton as quickly as possible. But there were moments in Chicago. I'm making a whole video series about my experience there this year, where I was like, I see the pocket. It's right there. That's where I'm gonna win the race. But I'm not willing to take that risk. Like the fitness was there, the stones to actually occupy that space were not, because I saw people doing really terrifying things that I wasn't willing to do. But
And honestly, and it's not just in amateur cycling. It's not just Intelligence Cup and just your local crits. It's all the way up the chain. You're watching the Tour de France, what's happening, and the risks are taking the descents. I mean, you need to make the difference somewhere these days. And if you can't make the difference on the smaller climbs or the massive climbs, and they're attacking just as hard on the descents, and sometimes that is a differential maker. And you get to the top of that climb, or in the Giro d'Italia, and I've been there many times where you're like, Vincenzo Nibali or somebody goes in front, you're like, oh my god, here we go.
He's gonna
just like, here we
yeah.
please.
Yeah. So 7 times. Oh my god. 7 times, like 3 on one, 4 on the other. You got the surgeries. Oh yeah, I see it.
Yeah. Yeah, I need to probably take him out, but I don't know. I just don't. I'm too lazy, and I don't want to be like, because you have what 7 or 8 screws and plates on each side, and then you have holes in so then you have to wait to have them heal because you more anyway. So
I had this side taken out, and then I had to wait to ride because the screw holes have to fill in. This side I still have a plate. But what a sport, man. I don't think that's ever going to go away, right? It doesn't matter. Like we talk about people's skill set not keeping up with their fitness and their physical ability. But like, even if it did, like, that's just still an inherent part of the sport, right?
It is. I mean, in my family with my great uncles and my dad, and when I first broke my collarbone I think I was 18 years old in Australia, my family's like, well, now you're a real bike racer. I'm like, what is that supposed to mean?
Like, what do I do with that information?
Now you're a real bike racer. Yeah, good job. You're like, you're part of the family. Now you're in the fraternity. I'm like, oh my goodness. So yeah, it is part of the sport. And even if there is, like, for the Tour de France, for example, there's so many times that it's out of your control. It's not necessarily your fault. It might not even been the guy who crashed first's fault. It's just like a compound of errors in a crit. There's many times where those errors are going to spring up.
Yeah, no, totally. It's high risk, high reward situations you put yourself in, and like you said, it's not always somebody's fault. Like, it could be somebody got a flat tire, and they didn't realize they had a slow leak in their front. You take the corner and they just wash out and take the field out with them. Sometimes that's just the way it works.
Yeah. Well, I will tell. Okay, we'll end with this. We got to get off the morbid side of the sport.
All right.
But I will. My worst crash easily was in the Giro, and that was stage 3. I had this horrible thing about stage 3 for a little while there, where I didn't get past stage 3 for like a year. It was bad, and I ripped all my spokes out of my front wheel. I touched the derailleur, and it ripped all of them. So I looked down, and there's no spokes left, and of course your forks go straight into the ground, and this went splat on my back. No road rash, but 7 broken bones, 5 vertebrae in my hip.
No road rash is a bad thing. That means the impact was somewhere else. Yeah.
Always a bad thing. And then, just like you're explaining with being 21-year-old, the same thing goes with myself, where, I try to get ready for the tour as fast as possible. And this is in May, and so I took a couple of weeks to heal, and I ended up top 10 in the Tour de France the next month. But man, I wasn't the same for a long time after that. It took me 2 years to recover for the damage that it did to my body during that Tour de France. Anyway, so let's move on.
I was going to say, okay.
Yeah.
I appreciate this story. Let's move on.
Yeah.
Change gears a little bit. Pardon the pun. I watched this. I watched this documentary, and this one line stuck with me: blood, sweat, and gears. Do you remember that from way
Yes.
back?
Yes.
Yes. So there was this moment where they were asking you about like some testing thing with like Lance. How I don't know if they got into details. I didn't watch this in 10 years, but they talked about like you tested better. Like was that a VO2 or an FTP test? Do you remember that line in the documentary?
Yeah. Yeah. I forgot how this story ever happened, because I think it took, so that test was in '99, and that was at our training camp in Solvang. We were testing out some new drink mix from, I forgot what our sponsor was. Anyway, so we were doing some lactate testing to see what, some people had the placebo, some people had the regular carbohydrate mix. And yeah, I guess I won, but then on the sheet, Johan made it that Lance won,
Yeah.
which I think is a genius move, honestly. So you have somebody you just want to keep on building their confidence that they can do this, that they're all the best. And but I never knew. And to be honest with you, I was pretty psyched to get second, to everybody.
Wait, so do you remember? Do you know what the test was? Was it just like a time trial test, or was it like actual like VO2, like a an objective
No,
test?
it was not. It was not in the lab, but it was, it was a test that was, on the road.
Okay,
So
maybe
it
lactate
was
or
just
something.
uphill time trial. If it was like 10K or something like that, that was like gradual uphill to the top of the climb, and take the time, take the lactate, all those kind of things. And so yeah, I had the fastest time.
So and then that information was withheld from you, or like Lance was told he was first because he's the team leader. So that kind of like that begs the question, how much of success in this sport is about just like the mental aspect of it. Like I am the team leader, I am the alpha, I am going to win, even if maybe I'm not testing the best on the team.
Absolutely massive, man. I mean, it's so big because the margins have become so small, and you see it in the tour. You'll have some great riders, and the second they get that first big success, they realize that, oh, I'm on the same playing field as these guys. I could do this, even though I've been a worker forever. So that was me in 2008, where I ended up fourth place in the tour. But if I had more of a, not positive, but if I just had more confidence in myself, God, who knows what I could have
Yeah.
done. There's so many things looking back throughout my career, that you put yourself in a certain position where this is where you think this is your lane, and you just stay in that lane and just do your best and be happy that you're still a pro. But then you start getting these little bit of confidence boost, and not only for yourself, but the team has confidence in you, and they're going to push you a little bit farther. So I was definitely a reluctant leader many times, and Jonathan Vaughters put me in that spot. When we started the Slipstream organization, and we were tiny. It was just, it was the same thing as US Postal back in the '90s. So we had nothing, and that's exactly what happened. And day after day, and that's why I think I liked Grand Tour so much, is that you knew what you were dealing with. But after the first week already, people are going to change a little bit. Some people are going to crack, and it's a game of attrition. But knowing where you stand always helps. But being able to really push yourself and have the confidence that you're going to break somebody maybe wasn't there for me all the way, but having that utmost confidence in yourself, like Tadej, who's never known anything
Yeah.
but being on podiums of Grand Tours. I mean, and it just shows you that he just goes after it. He trains like it. Because if you have the mentality in training too, where you have the demon, you have the devil on your one shoulder saying, yeah, I don't forget about those 4x5 minute VO2s that you're supposed to do today. Like, why? I mean, you're just going to go to get 27th in the race, but if you're thinking, I need to do this to win, then yeah, that mental shift definitely does make you into a different performer.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's just such small potatoes compared to like what your experience was. But like my best results always came from other good results, right? Because that confidence stacks. Like my big breakout year was 2018. I started to find success, and then I'd realized I had that mental shift, like you talked about. It's like, oh, I belong here. Like now I expect that of myself, and then that's confidence basically, and that's the biggest motivator too. Like it would make me train harder. It would make me pay attention to my diet a little bit more, and then all of it, right? It's like it all adds up together, and it just makes you a much better athlete. But I feel like you spent a lot of your career in service of others. Did you, like, how often were you put in the position of being the team leader versus the domestique?
Starting off, I was born into that era where I was with Lance, so like, for example, I was in the top 10 in the tour, at the first time all the way through day number 10, but you're asked for a bigger goal, and that's yellow jersey. It's just totally understandable. So then that was my mental shift, where it was in service of others and not have the pressure on my shoulders. So I loved that role. I loved being in the service of others and seeing the team win. So like I said, I was a reluctant leader, so I wasn't really put into that position until really a couple times with CSC, where we just had such an amazing team from top to bottom, where we get those opportunities to race for the win once in a while. And then obviously in Garmin, I was put into that leadership role right away, and it wasn't easy for me, but you start to learn a little bit. But I think it made me a little bit more well-rounded as a leader, because I know what it felt like to be that guy who was being asked to be on the front and then still go for Team GC and then still go get water bottles. And it's, and then have your family and friends ask you, well, what happened today? I saw you finish, and this is before we had wall-to-wall coverage of the sport. Well, I rode on the front for 75 miles before the mountain happened, and I was dead, so that was probably the hardest thing, was really the people back home who were just living and dying through results and seeing like, oh, he came back in the gruppetto, but they didn't see what I did before that. So that's where I think the sport's definitely involved in that aspect. But as far as my mental side and staying, being asked to be the leader and being relied upon, that was really just 2008 and 9 and 11, 12, more or less. In 2010, after I butchered myself, I was a mess throughout that year, and probably most likely had Epstein-Barr, in hindsight, almost for sure, because I couldn't get out of my own way.
Wow. So your biggest results came in those years? Like, I know you won, was it the Tour of Colorado or US Pro Challenge?
Yeah.
Yeah. Was you say your biggest individual result?
Yeah, I mean, I won Luxembourg, Tour of Luxembourg. Missouri was a big race as well in 08. But yeah, I had so much fun in 2012 as well, and the team was fantastic that
Giro,
year too.
that was Ryder's year, right?
Yeah, and Ryder won the Giro. We had a horrible Tour de France. We were all crashed really hard. I think I got second at one stage, but really, as far as my GC aspirations, we suck, because we all were in this 100-man pileup in Metz, and so that was I think it was called the Massacre of Metz. So that was a disastrous tour for us. But then it becomes kind of like Primoz Roglic, where it becomes a training camp. You finish the race, and it's obviously obscenely hard. You recover from that. If you recover from that and you got good form, then I couldn't do anything wrong after that for US Pro. So I had absolute blast there.
Let's change gears again. I want to talk about training and how that's changed too. What was your typical year like? Let's talk about a year. It doesn't matter which one. Maybe 2012. Because that was a big year for you and the team. What's it like coming into a Grand Tour? Like, when do you start preparation for that? Like walk me through, like in broad strokes, when do you start doing base training? When do you start doing more specialty stuff? And then, like, how do you taper into a big Grand Tour like that? I'm curious.
Yeah, that's not easy. With me, it was always a massive load. So, doing a bunch of races at the time, or I used to like to race right around 80 some days a year, right around there when I had good fitness, which is a lot.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Now, it's a lot. So now it's more like 50 or 60. So because they know so much more about training, or they have the capabilities of doing these massive training camps with the whole team, which takes a lot of money, obviously, as well. So we didn't have that at the time. So just doing a bunch of races that made sense. So for me, it was doing some classics, doing a training camp, doing the classics, Flèche and Liège, Romandy, taking a week or so off. So having that massive amount of work done, and then taking the week more or less chill, and then going into the Grand Tour. So just trying to recoup that, recover as much. But that was just for the Giro. The Tour de France was always so much more preparation, went in from the monetary side from the team, and of course pressure, because if you do well in the Tour, it saves your whole year. It doesn't matter what happened throughout. So doing a massive training camp. So we do the Giro d'Italia, which is obviously the same thing as Tour de France, 21 stages, and then we go straight up to altitude. So in 08 we went straight from the finish line right up to San Moritz at 6,000 feet.
Wait,
and stayed there.
You went from the Giro with 3 weeks in your legs, and you immediately go into a training camp?
Yeah, I mean, but the training camp doesn't mean you're necessarily training, especially that first, not training hard, right? So you're just doing recovery rides, but you're getting that stimulus of being up at altitude. And then from there, we went back up to La Molina, which is right on the border of Spain and France, and close to Girona, Spain, where I lived for 16 years. And so then we did the finishing touches up there for another 10 days, and then come home and rest up and first of all lose a bunch of weight.
Does that weight loss happen during the training camps?
Yeah, yeah.
So are you pretty mindful when you're there? You're obviously working with like a nutritionist. Are you pretty mindful of what's going in? Like, how much control is there? Are you able to sneak some chocolate chip cookies like before you go to sleep? Like, how controlled of an environment is it when your focus is and the team's goal is Tour de France results?
It wasn't dictatorial by any stretch of imagination with our team. So it was like, if you wanted to make it happen, you made it happen. We had Alan Lim was with us, and this was the beginnings of Scratch. And so Al was looking after us there, and he's amazing at taking care of his riders and really just making sure you're happy first and foremost. So if you're hungry and you're eating good food, you're most likely going to be happy, especially when you're sitting up on top of a mountain by yourself for weeks on end. So it was really just that, and just being mindful again, not breaking and having those chocolate chip cookies, before you go to bed, those kind of things, and having the confidence again, what we came back to, for you're doing this for a reason, because you do have a chance of doing a great result here. And so with all that tied together and having a great team bond as well, and everyone going for one common goal, then you have a little bit of magic sauce going at the same time.
That's a good point you make about like riders being happy, because like if you're miserable, you're not going to be training as well, and you're not going to be motivated to get good results. So, but there wasn't like, I don't know, just as an outsider, I feel like there would be more pressure. There wasn't like were there weigh-ins and like making sure that you're hitting?
Yeah. We weighed ourselves before every ride and after a ride. So we were definitely cutting edge. A lot of things that came into the sport was because of Al and because of the team and Jonathan Vaughters saying that, because at that point, this is 2008, man. It was still kind of dark days coming out of it. So we were, we started the no needle policy. We started, but then on the other side, all the text, it was like, all right, if we're going against all these guys, we need to give them every chance they possibly can do to at least compete with these guys. So the technology with the skin suits, the wind tunnels, the warm-up protocol, which in the cool down protocol, no one did that shit back then, man. Nobody. And with the ice vest, which everyone has now, which everyone was laughing at us when we went to the start line with ice vests on and at the Giro d'Italia, and then we won, and then they stopped laughing. Those kind of things were ground shaking and changing at the time. And but now, I mean, that was so 14 years ago. I mean, it might as well have been the dark ages compared to what they do now. I mean, for what they have as far as an app for, all right, this is how many kilojoules your ride's going to be here today. This is what you should be ingesting per hour because you're doing this kind of intensity. This is what you need to have afterwards. I mean, it's all just there for you. It's really just plug and play. So if you have the mindset to be able to do that and to live like a monk and just pretty much be a machine, yes, to your point, that's why the training camps work so well, because in a race, there's so exactly in the race, it's so many things are out of your control. Whereas at a training camp, you could tell we're going to do 5 hours, not 5 hours and 5 minutes, not 4 hours 50. This is what we're going to do today. Yeah, you make it happen.
Do you think that's what it takes nowadays to find success? Do you have to train and eat and sleep and do everything like a robot, like you said, like live like a monk, and just do everything as this formula? Do you think that's a prerequisite for success in this sport in 2022?
Yeah, and the only thing you left out is just be happy and want it, and that's a big difference I see with people, because it's not for everyone. It's hard, to be by yourself. The reason that you got in the sport is to race, not to sit on top of a mountain and train. So some of the trainers do really well with that, but some of the racers, they break doing those kind of training camps.
You have to enjoy the process. I tell that to people all the time, because people want the silver bullet, right? I mentioned this before. I mentioned this earlier. People always ask me like, how do I get faster? Like, what's the one exercise for me to get faster? And it's like, there isn't one, but you just have to enjoy the process of training and nutrition and all of it, because like, let's be realistic. Most of the time you spend is going to be on a solo training route if you want to find success in this sport, especially at a high level, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I will say that most of the people who retire don't really miss the sport. They don't really miss the racing. If they're lucky enough to have a good career, they miss the process though.
Yeah.
They miss knowing what they want to do. They miss the reasons why they're putting themselves through things, and then of course they miss the camaraderie. Those are the things that you get at those kind of training camps, and it's a challenge for sure. But if you enjoy it and if you lean into that, then you're going to have massive success. But it's definitely changed the way, I don't think some of the racers that I race against would be as good as they were back then in this kind of racing. But man, it doesn't ever make for the best grand tours these days, the way these guys race now.
I had so much fun watching this year's tour. The time. So, okay, let's talk about this. You mentioned the dark days of the sport.
Yeah.
We are now, like, the times, the average speeds, up like benchmark climbs and things like that. We are now approaching those same times as from the dark days. How much of that do you think is us just having the aforementioned training and equipment and nutrition and everything so dialed? And how much of it do you think, if any, is like people are just on the next level shit that is not detectable by drug tests?
Yeah. First of all, I'm not going to put my hand in the fire for anybody, but I will say that I think that I do think and believe that cycling is the cleanest professional sport in the world right now, just for how much control there is within the sport. That said, yeah, it's the first thing is nutrition. I mean, you think of what we were talking about earlier about what these guys are putting in their body, and realizing the boundaries, what we thought were the boundaries are not the boundaries. And for example, ours, what we thought was 350 calories per hour, and they're realizing no, you could do like 500 per hour. And then of course training with that kind of, so being that much stronger and then lighter, of course. I mean, you think of Pantani, most of those times are set by him, and there's some that will never be broken, right? Let's be honest. I mean,
because the drugs make that big of a difference, right? Like,
well, the extreme of what was going on in the mid 90s, yes, with Ponton, and he was, an amazing bike rider to boot. So, but that said, some of the other ones, yeah, they were broken this year. Brandon McNulty broke one of those records this year, and that was badass, man.
Yeah.
I mean, and he's a kid I've known since he was 17 years old, riding at 420 watts, ripping me off his wheel, and I didn't think that was possible then either.
I've had to race against him too. It was awful.
Yeah,
and by racing against him, meaning like, oh, there he goes. Like,
yeah. I saw him. He was in my general vicinity.
We started the race together. We certainly did not finish the race together.
but yeah, I mean, think about Tony's bike. It was probably 22 pounds as well. So you just take that off, 7 pounds off somebody else. I mean, you like what you're just doing, that demonstration of watts per kilo.
Yeah.
I mean,
the math is there. It's simple. Yeah. And like, I understand the draw for some of these athletes, during the dark ages of cycling. Like I understand that, like, you could do all these things correct, but if the guy next to you is also doing the illegal thing, like, that's what makes people's career. And it's the difference between being this forgettable figure in the peloton versus like the star. Like, I understand the motivation for people to break the rules.
Yeah.
Was there pressure for you? Like when did that pressure start for you?
Well, when you, first of all, it was more of a fear thing that you couldn't compete. You couldn't even finish races without.
Because everyone else is doing it, right?
Yeah, and that's the way it was. And then when, like you said, when everyone surpasses you, the guys that used to kill as an amateur, all are making really good money. And I think that was, but I think it was mostly the fear that you couldn't do it. And what we realize now is it was all bullshit. If we knew what we could do at the time, then no one, if you had the opportunity or the choice, either or, then I don't think anyone would have. Because you don't grow up ever thinking that this is what I want to do. Like, hell no one wants to do that. It was just, but you go down. I think most of the people went down that road so far that there was no way out. And then you get pressured to do results, to stay on the team, and then before you know it, bad shit happens.
So nowadays there isn't that pressure because testing is much more sophisticated.
Testing, but really, I think what JV started, with John Vaughter started in 2008, and showing that the possibility that it can happen clean. And I think that was the biggest thing that I'm most proud of when I think back in my career of what we did. I mean, it was terrifying, man. I'm not going to lie. I thought we were going to get crushed, but realizing that with science and with things that actually make sense, and what you're putting in your body, how you train, all these kind of things, the recovery protocols, they make a massive difference. They might be marginal in one, but they add up to many different things. Okay, now they've all been surpassed and the marginal gains have gone through the roof in different ways. But yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the coolest things in hindsight, looking back, of what we did to make people realize, like, Bradley Wiggins, for example, came to our team the next year because he realized that, oh man, these guys are doing something cool. I want to be on a clean team. And they made me realize that it is possible. Were they ready to quit the sport before that?
Yeah, that was a fun documentary to watch.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
It was like, I watched it when it was like my most transformative years as a cyclist, when I was like the most excited, right? Like I raced for maybe 1 or 2 years. I was like, oh, is this for me? And then I really just went gung-ho on the sport, and I watched that documentary probably 10 times back like 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And I was into it, man. That was a fun one. And I always looked up to you and that whole squad from that era.
No, it was a cool time. Really neat time to be a part of. Nigel Dick shot all of that, and Nigel is famous for all the music videos that we all grew up watching, like all the Britney Spears, the Welcome to the Jungle. So he was actually with Pamela Anderson at the time doing something, and he got the opportunity. So he's always been into cycling. So, hey, you want to go to the Tour de France and shoot this documentary? He's like, yes. And so he quit his job over there and came over. So having Nigel, who we're still friends with to this day, be a part of that was really cool. So there's a lot of craziness going on. I mean, even think of David Miller inviting. So this is a time when we had to like prove our innocence all the time. So we had journalists like sleeping over in our rooms at times, to prove like there's nothing. We're not hiding anything. It was a crazy time, man. It really was.
And that was what, 08, 09?
Yeah, 08, 09, yeah.
I had another question I wanted to ask you about like, everyone knows the Tour de France and Grand Tours are like arguably the hardest events in sport. Were there any like one days, or were there any races that are sleepers that people don't think about as being like incredibly difficult that bike racers know are incredibly difficult?
I think the first one that always comes to mind is Tour of the Basque Country, which is arguably the hardest race that I've ever done. I mean, especially before we had all the GPS technology of knowing where the hell we were going, and you just relied on what the organizer gave you. For example, you'd be in the Basque Country and you take a right-hand turn and there'd be a wall in front of you. But on the course profile, it was like this little thing that you didn't even think of.
Yeah.
And holy shit. And all the local people would be like sprint to the front. Like, and so you would really have to pay attention to what the local guys are doing, because if they're like pushing and shoving for the front, all of a sudden, some crazy stuff's going to happen in front of you. And before you know it, you're going up a 20% grade for 2K, and so this
could tell you got to follow those orange jerseys for
always the orange guys, follow those guys. So Tour of Basque Country I would say is, for the sporting aspect, and of course on the fan side, those guys are incredible. They're hard people in the Basque Country. It's cold, it's rainy, but their fans are out there in the tens of thousands every day, and they know you're random people. They know everyone in the peloton. So that's probably the biggest. I don't know if it's really a sleeper. I mean, it's a big race, but I don't feel that most people know what that means over there. If you got a stage win in the Tour of Basque Country,
yeah,
respect for life.
I've ridden those roads. I did a bike tour through there, and I have an appreciation for how steep and narrow and treacherous some of those roads can be. Absolutely. And I remember Horner won it one year. Must have been 11 or something like that.
I know Chris definitely won it. I got seconds and thirds and stages. I always wanted the hat so bad.
Yeah.
It's one of and then San Sebastian as well. You think about that is fantastic race. We've had a couple Americans win there as well. So there's so many races out there. They truly are. I mean, obviously everyone knows Roubaix, and now the classics are getting bigger. No one knew what some of the smaller classics were when I was in the Pro Tour. They might have known Tour of Flanders, maybe, but now Tour of Flanders is massive here in the cycling scene in the US. And that's another big change as well, being able to stream all these races from start to finish. Everyone has an app. GCN's been doing a great job. NBC Sports is up their game, making sure that it's from start to finish every day. That's a big change. Whereas before we only had maybe the last 2 hours of the race, even at the Tour de France. So
Yeah.
it's crazy to think that it's not that long ago we only got to see that. And now you get to see how hard it is to get into a breakaway, for example, and how long they race sometimes to let breakaways established.
And that's funny too, because, obviously you do the commentary, the Tour de France. Some of the most interesting moments of the race for me are when that break is established early on, and sometimes you don't even get the feed. I mean, nowadays everything is streaming; you get it on demand. But to your point, like sometimes, they just like pick up race. Okay, we have 50 kilometers left. I'm like, yeah, but how did everything happen up to this point? Like there was, like one of the most interesting parts of the race is that first 10 kilometers, sometimes first 50 kilometers when the break is established. I love that part of the race. It's so dynamic. Who are we letting in? Who are we not letting in? Which jerseys are in there? What's the GC times? All that stuff.
And brutally hard. I mean, you can't imagine how hard it is to get in breakaway. So if you're tasked with that, so you're in the team meeting, you're like, all right, Jeff, you need to be in the breakaway here today. And you're like already sweating in the bus, like thinking about how horrible this is going to be, especially later on in the stage race where everyone's hungry because they don't have a stage win on the team. So there's a lot of pressure that's mounting. And it could even be a day that doesn't suit you at all, but you still need to be in the breakaway somehow, and that is, it's not an easy task. There's some guys who have the nose for it and some people who just can never find their way into that breakaway, or they don't have the punchiness to be able to get across to the break.
I watched you get second that one stage in the Tour. You'll remember it, against the Frenchman. Yeah, and I was rooting for you, man. I remember watching that stage. You got it. And then the slow twitch leg, muscle fibers in your legs said, no, not today.
Dude, I was so slow. And then you talk about confidence. Like I was like, psych myself out of that even before. I mean, even if I would have done the best sprint of my life, I still would have lost that. I mean, but
he's a sprinter, right? What's his name?
Yeah,
he's out of the sport now.
Patrice, he had a funny nose. I remember.
Yeah,
I think Patrice. Anyway, he won quite a few stages at the Tour. A sleeper of a guy, never said boo, but such a badass when on his day, and it almost impossible to beat one-on-one. But yeah, that's a great example. Like David Miller led me out to get into the breakaway that day. So I had a full lead out just to get on another hill. I mean, it was one of those days where, I mean, Tyler Ferrer, I remember he was going to not make the time cut. He was like 2 towns behind us at that point in time because the peloton had just been exploded. So yeah, I don't miss it, man. I'm fortunate. I can't believe I did some of the things, especially when watching it. Like, I think there's quite a few of us, you watch once in a while, you're like, holy shit, how did we ever do that? And I feel like every year the game is just upped another % or 2 as well.
Well, you got a wall of bikes. Can we look at the wall of bikes again?
Yeah. Sure.
Because I don't think I saw any disc brakes. And I wanted to get your take on that, because that is one of the most requested topics is rim versus disc brakes. It's like the hottest issue right now in terms of equipment.
Yeah.
If you had to give me an answer to that with no more context, just rim or disc brakes.
I mean, I do all my bikes that I use have disc brakes in them, on them right now. Do I actually need them for racing? No, not really. I mean, you see Julian Alaphilippe, he does things on descent with rim brakes that no one can ever do. And it doesn't matter, Peter Sagan or Wout van Aert, any of these guys. But it's just an evolution of the sport and of cycling. And, when they make those better and better, for example, the wheel changes are still way too long. So if you get a flat tire, you're in trouble right now. So a lot of times you have to do a full bike change because it's not quick enough with a through axle. So, but I think all that's going to start to evolve. They're going to find a way to have a quicker wheel change, and then all the brakes are going to get better. You're not going to have rubber brakes as much, just like a car. When they went from drum to, I'm sure people are saying we don't need drum brakes are great. Yeah, they're fine. Yeah. Just my Model T had them. They're fine. We don't need anything more. And
there's always going to be holdouts for sure.
Yeah,
I heard a pretty interesting argument, and I don't know how prevalent disc brakes were towards the end of your career. Were people on disc brakes on road bikes at the time? It was still all rim.
Yeah.
Well, in any case, you can still give me your thoughts on this. It's a mixed peloton. I heard a good argument that it's like, okay, disc or rim, but not a mix of the both, because then like it starts raining and you have varying braking performance within the peloton. You mentioned earlier, back before they had the rim brake compound worked out, you had people who were just like, flying off the side of a mountain because they couldn't stop when it started raining. So
Exactly.
I think the same argument can be made for a mixed peloton of rim and disc, because you have people who at the front maybe can stop really fast, and people are just stacking up into the back of them. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts
and
on that?
yeah, no, that was a point that I always made as well from the beginning, that could cause some danger, because there's times, as you well know, with carbon wheels where when it's raining hard, it's like 1,000, 2,000, and then it starts breaking.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
doesn't.
yeah.
It
You can
almost feels like
squeeze as
you're
hard as you
accelerating.
want. Yeah.
Yeah, it almost feels like you're accelerating as you hit the brakes. Um, so yeah, that's a big difference. But really, the biggest thing I have to think of with the difference between rim brakes and disc brakes is being able to feel the feel of the brake is so much better. So you could articulate the brakes just a little bit better going through corners. And with the rim brakes, it's a lot of times on or off, pretty much, or you pull too hard and you're going to lock it up. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
I could feel it underneath me so much better, and I have 10 times more confidence with the disc brakes than I do with the rim brakes.
That's what I tell people too. Like, say what you want about setup and all that. Yeah, like they're probably harder to set up, and they're more prone to like whatever rubbing and that sort of thing. They add a little bit of weight. These are all objective facts, but they break better. And at the end of the day, they're brakes. So that's what they needed to do the best. That's always my point. But they won't win or lose you a race unless you are really riding that fine line. That's my thought.
Exactly.
But hey, I could talk to you for hours, man. But it's already been one. I'll probably let you get back to your day. It's been great having you on.
Thanks, dude. Yeah, my pleasure. I like watching what you guys are doing, and it really did hit me, and I'm glad we talked about it. It's just like the average bike rider out there is so much better these days, and there's so much great information out there as well, and almost sometimes too much information where people don't necessarily know what to do. But I hope you guys get some more bike races, at least locally, for you to show up those skills and hone those skills.
Well, I'd love to have you on for like race commentary, because you just mentioned like there's maybe a lot of information but not a lot of guidance, which was a problem we talked about earlier in this interview. It'd be great to have you on for some race commentary. Talk about maybe even from Chicago, back your old stomping grounds.
Oh my God, I'll think about that. We can do a little bit of highlights, but guidance in particular. I mean, that's what we've been working with the breakaway as well. I mean, it's simple. It's just not easy with all these things. There's so much information coming at you with your power. Now you wear super sapiens to see what your blood glucose is. There's just a lot coming at it, and it really is just it's simple, but it's not easy, right? And just being able to have consistency, workload, intensity, and then of course recovery, and just articulate that in an easy way. It's really not that hard, but we try to complicate things as human beings, I think, sometimes a little bit too much.
All right, man.
So let's do the races, and I'll critique you and tell you how bad you're going through the corners.
Oh, please. I would love nothing more, man. All right. Keep in touch, huh, Christian?
All right. Thanks, Jeff.